Champion, Slow Rewind, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a barely noticed development last week, the Army stationed an active unit inside the United States. The Infantry Division's 1st Brigade team is back from Iraq, now training for domestic operations under the control of U.S. Army North, the Army service component of Northern Command. The unit will serve as an on-call federal response for large-scale emergencies and disasters. It's being called the Consequence Management Response Force, CCMRF, or CSMRF for short. It's the first time an active unit has been given a dedicated assignment to U.S. NORTHCOM, which was itself formed in October 2002 to, quote, provide command and control of Department of Defense homeland defense efforts. An initial news report in the Army Times newspaper last month noted, in addition to emergency response, the force, quote, may be called upon to help with civil unrest and crowd control. The Army Times has since appended a clarification. In a September 30th press release from the Northern Command states, quote, this response force will not be called upon to help with law enforcement, civil disturbance, or crowd control. When Democracy Now! Spoke to Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Jamie Goodpaster, a public affairs officer for NORTHCOM, she said the force would have weapons stored in containers on site as well as access to tanks, but the decision to use weapons would be made at a far higher level, perhaps by Secretary of Defense, SecDef. Well, I'm joined now by two guests. Army Colonel Michael Boatner is Future Operations Division Chief of U.S. NORTHCOM. He joins me on the phone from Colorado Springs. We're also joined from Madison, Wisconsin by journalist and editor of the Progressive magazine, Matthew Rothschild. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Why don't we begin with Colonel Michael Boatner? Can you explain the significance, the first time, October 1st deployment of the troops just back from Iraq?
Yes, Amy, I'd be happy to. And again, there has been some concern and some misimpressions that I'd like to correct. The primary purpose of this force is to provide help to people in need in the aftermath of a WMD-like event in the homeland. It's something that figures very prominently in the national planning scenarios under the National Response Framework, and that's how DoD provides support in the homeland to civil authority. This capability is tailored technical life-saving support and then further logistic support for that very specific scenario. So we designed it for that purpose, and really the new development is that it's been assigned to NORTHCOM because there's a increasingly important requirement to ensure that they have done that technical training, that they can work together as a joint service team. These capabilities come from all of our services and from a variety of installations, and that's not an ideal command and control environment. So we've been given control of these forces so that we can train them, ensure they're responsive, and direct them to participate in our exercises so that were they called to support civil authority, those governors or local state jurisdictions that might need our help, that they would be responsive and capable in the event, and also would be able to survive based on the skills that they have learned, trained, and focused on. They ultimately have weapons, heavy weapons and combat vehicles and other service capability at their home station at Fort Stewart, Georgia, but they wouldn't bring that stuff with them. In fact, they're prohibited from bringing it. They would bring their individual weapons, which is the standard policy for deployments in the homeland. Those would be centralized and containerized, and they could only be issued to the soldiers with Secretary of Defense permission. So I think that kind of wraps up our position on this. We're proud to be able to provide this capability. It's all about saving lives, relieving suffering, mitigating great property damage to infrastructure and things like that, and frankly restoring public confidence in the aftermath of an event like this.
So the use of the weapons would only be decided by SecDef, the Secretary of Defense. But what about the governors? The SecDef would have, Secretary of Defense would have, would be able to preempt the governors in a decision whether these soldiers would use their weapons on U.S. soil?
No, this basically only boils down to self-defense. Any military force has the inherent right to self-defense. And if the situation was inherently dangerous, then potentially the Secretary of Defense would allow them to carry their weapons. But it would only be for self and unit defense. This force has got no role in civil disturbance or civil unrest, any of those kinds of things.
Matt Rothschild, you've been writing about this in the Progressive magazine. What is your concern?
Well, I'm very concerned on a number of fronts about this, Amy. One, that NORTHCOM, the Northern Command that came into being in October of 2002, when that came in, people like me were concerned that the Pentagon was going to use its forces here in the United States, and now it looks like, in fact, it is, even though on its website it says it doesn't have units of its own. Now it's getting a unit of its own. And Colonel Boatner talked about this unit, what it's trained for. Well, let's look at what it's trained for. This is the 3rd Infantry 1st Brigade Combat Unit that has spent 3 of the last 5 years in Iraq in counterinsurgency. It's a warfighting unit. It was one of the first units to Baghdad. It was involved in the Battle of Fallujah. And, you know, that's what they've been trained to do, and now they're bringing that training here. On top of that, one of the commanders of this unit was boasting in the Army Times about this new package of non-lethal weapons that has been designed, and this unit itself is going to be able to use, according to that original article. And, in fact, the commander was saying he'd even tasered himself and was boasting about tasering himself. So why is a Pentagon unit that's going to be possibly patrolling the streets of the United States involved in using tasers?
Well, I'd like to address that. That involves a service mission and a service set of equipment that was issued for overseas deployment. Those soldiers do not have that on their equipment list for deploying in the homeland. And again, though they have been involved in situations overseas, and having talked to commanders who've returned, those situations are largely nonviolent, non-kinetic, and when they do escalate, the soldiers have a lot of experience with seeing the indicators and understanding it. So I would say that our soldiers are trustworthy. They can deploy in the homeland, and American citizens can be confident that there will be no abuses.
Matt Rothschild.
Well, you know, that doesn't really satisfy me, and I don't think it should satisfy your listeners and your audience, Amy, because, you know, our people in the field in Iraq, some of them have not behaved up to the highest standard.